It's another Manly Monday, and this Manly Monday, we're talking about the connection between pushing feelings away and pushing people away. And Zelda is right here. Hello, Zelda. Come say hi before you break something. Here's Zelda. Here is Zelda. Zelda has very strong opinions. There you are, honey. Yeah. So, Zelda likes to push things off my desk. And this is a good metaphor for what I'm going to talk about today. And yes, this is Manly Monday, so it is going to be from uh, a male approach. Some of you may notice who work with me that I will do this thing that I will ask you, tell me how you feel about that. And what I usually get is a description of the facts and uh a story of betrayal or loss, or and I will summarize it as so you feel betrayed, disappointed, sad, lost, something like that. And somebody tends to go yes, and then they'll add something, and I'm like, good, because that is a sign that someone is actually feeling their feelings, as opposed to and just doesn't have the vocabulary for it, as opposed to actually not feeling their feelings. And some people do not feel their feelings. And there are many reasons for that. We're going to talk about one specific one today. Help support this channel if you like this content. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/LeannaK. We got to meet our goal of 6, preferably every week. The sooner we make that goal, the sooner I can see those people. And then we've got specifically the men's group fundraising on GoFundMe. I have been so bad at promoting that. I have been busy getting the Discord into beta, so to speak. The patrons have gotten access to the beta, and they gave me a lot of great feedback. I haven't had a chance to implement it all, but it was some pretty obvious stuff that's like, duh, right, yep, this is why we test. So the difference between feeling your feelings but not being able to name them and not feeling your feelings is profound. Now, it can be a bit of both, right? It's very hard to process feelings if you can't identify them. And I'm seeing more and more women have trouble identifying feelings, so they can't process them. But it's this weird, like, flip side of the coin phenomenon where women have trouble admitting they're angry because society punishes women for being angry. And so you know, it'll be false victimization, um, a bunch of other things that aren't healthy, manipulations, passive aggressiveness. With men, it's the exact opposite. It's, um, I also see women projecting emotions onto other people. Now, men do this too, but men tend to be fine with anger because society, even though, macro men are made out to be predatory and dangerous because angry men are normalized. But men, I've seen so many instances of men having emotions other than that, and being mocked for it. The videos out there of people, Baldur's Gate 3 clips, people mocking Astarion's trauma triggered moments. Holy shit. Yeah. I'm sitting there going, and Astarion's an interesting character in Baldur's Gate 3 and a good example of this topic because at the beginning of the game, he comes across as quite cruel. He disapproves if you try to help people, and he enjoys overt cruelty. And the choices are kind of ambivalent, stealing a coin or a ring from a tiefling kid who's trying to con you will earn his approval. And that's where we get into sort of moral things about, well, the kid's a little shit. Is that a life lesson? But, that enjoying cruelty is in many ways his way of pushing people away because of stuff you find out about the character later. Uh, and as much as it drove me crazy in my early hours of gameplay, it's actually a really good depiction of what people do to push their real feelings away, of feeling very vulnerable and traumatized, and thereby push good people away and only invite the bad people in, because the bad people are the only ones that will stick around for the abuse. Now, Asterion also approves of personal loyalty, which is something I found is definitely a thing with a lot of the guys I work with, that there's a lack of trust at the beginning, which is completely understandable. Trust is earned. Once that trust is established, especially when he's been allowed to talk about his feelings and not rejected or mocked, well, we're in ride or die territory at that point. And I do think that's something that therapy tends to miss with men, is that required detachment in traditional methods doesn't get in the places it needs to get, because men internalize that heartache means they did something wrong in a way that's unique to women. There's all these women get screwed over by the system in a different way. There's all these mantras of it wasn't your fault, it wasn't your fault, with women, and that can keep people stuck, because if we're talking in a paradigm of fault, we're not working in a paradigm of accountability, where there are things you can control going forward. There are things you can change. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong, but be accountable for the decisions you made. And accountable and blame are not the same thing. Problem is, a lot of people do not have accountability modeled for them. As children, a lot of children are parentified or parentalized, depending on the terminology you want to use, meaning they had to grow up too fast. They felt a sense of responsibility for parents or other people who are supposed to be caregivers. And there's a big difference between teaching someone personal responsibility and an unhealthy sense of responsibility for people you should not be responsible for. And that forms something called enmeshment, which is not healthy. It means there's a lack of healthy boundaries. It means people are expecting unrealistic things. You may also have heard the term codependency, and it can feel really good in the short term because it feels so close. But long term, it isn't healthy, because it's making both parties, in some ways, it's not giving one party proper personhood, proper adulthood through accountability. And it's robbing the other party of personhood by blaming them for absolutely everything. And that's not taking blame for things that are not your fault. It's not accountability. It isn't true ownership of your part in things. It's well, it's this will be hard to hear. Give me a second. Try not to have a reaction here. It's a form of manipulation. If I take on more than I actually think I'm accountable for, they'll stay with me. That's the manipulation. Instead of it being, well, they have a choice here. I will own what I did. I will not claim um, ownership of things that are not my problem. And it's funny because I'm finding myself playing RPGs differently. Sorry, this tends to hit pops. Apologies if there was anything before that. Um, I have found myself playing RPGs differently post trauma therapy, in that I've been acutely aware of how dissonant heroism is. And Baldur's Gate 3 is a good example of that. Don't worry, no spoilers. It's just the setup of the game. The setup of the game is that you have been captured by mind flayers and had this really psycho looking worm put in your eye that's burrowing into your brain and allegedly going to make you an illithid. Now, mind flayer. Obviously, that's the setup. But then you get thrown in this game world and you get this series of, oh, help these people. And when you think about it, really think about it, if we're using real world logic instead of video game logic, it's patently irresponsible to help those people, since you think you might turn into a monster that will eat all those people at any given time. You're not helping. And that's an example of what people do when they're trying to manipulate through good acts. They're trying to people please. They're trying to make people stay by helping, which actually isn't helping, because the person is so overextended, they turn into a monster unpredictably. It's a really interesting metaphor. But of course, you're supposed to be helpful to people. You're supposed to be a hero. And I've been questioning this more and more because I'm playing as a tiefling, and of course, there's fairy racism in Forgotten Realms. And my attitude is I got bigger problems right now. That is how I would react in real life. And so Starion and I are butts. It's so weird. But I look at, and I know that wasn't the reaction. That wasn't the choice I would have made when I was like, I don't remember. I was real young. It was 1999, right? When I played the original Baldur's Gate and wanted to be hero, Now, granted, okay, the setup for the previous games was not you could turn into a monster at any moment. And maybe I've got a bit of Bloodborne hangover from, those people that just turned into monsters and all that stuff. But you can't help other people when you've got this issue that you're ignoring. And it's kind of a great metaphor for, or it would be if I thought this was intentional. And this is the issue with sort of choice in video games, and more I am questioning the type of heroism that games push on primarily men. Now, wanting to help people is good. And that's why I'm like, hold on, hear me out here. Wanting to help people in the way you can is good. Overextending yourself so that you push yourself into trauma while you're trying to help people, that's where I get the metaphor of could turn into a monster and eat anybody at any time. Now, what I don't want is for people to think that means I have to remove myself from people. It doesn't, because, and I don't know, I haven't finished the game, but the reason that is you can go around and still be hero in a video game is, you know, that the cliche of you will turn in a couple of days. Well, it's already been a couple of days because I've camped twice and I haven't turned into a monster. We are very, very special. We are different than everyone else who gets brain tadpole, right? Like, and then we have that exceptionalism and the idea of a born hero, which I don't like, because I see so many people who love these games and want to do good who think I can't because I'm not inherently special. And so then they behave like Asterion and support petty cruelties and line up behind the biggest bully. And again, Asterion is a good character. There are reasons for what he does, which is why I'm using him as an example. Because I always marvel at the idea that some of the best people that I know now came from the other side of this giant culture war fight. But there's still people. I had an experience just 2 days ago where a guy is working on a Gamergate book, apparently. And he approached me and asked originally if I wanted to be interviewed on YouTube. And so I did what I always do. I check out the guy's Twitter feed. And sure enough, there was this misgendering of trans people, calling trans women men. And I asked this guy, will there be misgendering in the interview? And he wouldn't answer the question. No matter how many chances I gave him, he wouldn't just say yes or no. And he ended up calling me unhinged. So something's going on there, right? That is someone, I think, my theory, giving this guy ample benefit of the doubt, because I actually contacted somebody and said, is this guy legit? Because I just had a very strange experience. Strange, not bad. And he said, yeah, he seems to mean well. All right, because this is what happened. The guy's like, well, okay, that's not cool. So what I think happened, giving this guy benefit of the doubt, is he was embarrassed that I saw that thing on his timeline. Because it's probably some posturing. And instead of feeling the embarrassment and processing it and behaving in a way that he was in control of that emotional state, he got defensive and pushed me away. And then he deflected by saying I was unhinged. And then he came back like weeks later and did it again. He tried to flatter me. And I said, I don't care if you like most of or a lot of what I do, if you're still okay with petty cruelty directed at people who are just trying to live their lives. He still didn't get it. And that's what happens when, and he called me unhinged again. That's what happens when you don't feel your feelings. That's what happens when you can't process negative emotions, behave in a productive way that will get you where you want to go. And I believe he at first I thought he was acting in bad faith because it seems so just obviously trollish, but now, finding out from somebody, no, he actually is who he says he is. A lot of projection and deflection, right? Not feeling feelings. And I use this as an example not to embarrass the guy. I'm using it as a concrete example of that turning into a monster around other people without warning. And it's this cycle, right? That you have negative self image. I'm a monster. Um, and so you try very, very, very hard to pack down your reactions to things. You try to be self sacrificing and do good, but you don't feel good inside. You feel like a monster. And you're packing down those feelings, packing down those feelings, packing down those feelings. And you want to do good, but you also want to keep people at arm's length. And eventually, the sheer buildup of the negative feedback loop becomes so intense. You have that lash out, you have that blow up, you have that projection and deflection. You turn into a monster and eat people's faces. And I'm in recovery from that behavior. This is why I talk about this. And I mean, I know that wasn't my initial instinct. That came from reaching out to people, wanting to connect with people, and getting shamed, getting mocked, being told I was weak. And, these were adults. I believed them. You know, I was screamed at again and again and again. One of the abusive behaviors I was subjected to as a child was that my biological father would keep me up until 3 a.m. mentally and emotionally abusing me, sometimes physically. He was violent just often enough to make me afraid. And, then I'd have to go to school the next day on 4 hours sleep, having been crying and feeling like everyone could see it and hiding it. So, of course, part of what I did is I pushed people away, right? Um, and I work with a lot of guys who talk about school being an example of being as small as possible because whenever you were noticed, bad things happened. And the truth is, my biological father truly believed that we could control our emotions. He used to scream at me. He was yelling at a 6-year-old to control my emotions. You can't at 6, but the truth is that you can't, period. You can control your reactions to emotions. You can control how you respond to emotions. The best thing to do is just decide, I'm feeling this, I'm not going to act on it. But you can't control that you feel things. The only way to do that is to dissociate. The only way to convince yourself you're doing that without dissociation is to deflect and project. I'm not angry, you're angry. I'm not scared, you're scared, right? It's not me, it's you. This has, moral of the story, my father who passed away years ago. And I still have to remind myself of that. It's weird. That's what abuse does, right? Not my stepfather, who was a good man, my biological father, but he's now remembered as a cautionary tale. And I don't think he was aware he was abusive. I think he thought he was fixing me, but in a narcissistic way where I was good if I was a positive reflection of him. I was bad if I was an embarrassment. How I felt, whether I was okay, was irrelevant because me being not okay was part of the embarrassment. How dare I make him look like a bad parent? And it sounds horrible. It was, right? But he was a man who, he was on Zoloft or something. I don't know what. But he couldn't admit what the condition was, what was really going on. It was probably an anxiety condition. He had a very low threshold for tolerance. So he'd blow up to be the biggest, scariest thing in the room, the monster, so that people would run away so he didn't eat their face. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, that had short-term benefits. It was useful to be able to pretend to be a big scary monster that was going to eat people's faces. But that was, deliberate to an extent. And maybe it was in his case too. Maybe he was just so afraid all the time. He thought he had to be a big scary monster to children. Um and teachers and employers and people who came to the door knocking as politicians, who knows. But that got, that's kind of what we used to call an anger management problem, right? But it was actually a mismanaged anxiety condition. And the trouble with conventional therapy is that a therapist only sees someone in the therapist's office. So they can only go based on what a person tells them. And so if you're not careful, you end up emboldening a person's worst characteristics. And because that's bad, a lot of therapists just stay very, very neutral and don't suggest things one way or the other. And then people who don't realize they need help get frustrated because they're putting all this money into something and not feeling better. And so they quit. Or you get the cases where I'm hearing about a lot of these lately. Somebody's been in therapy for like 2 or 3 years and showing no real improvement. And that shouldn't be happening. At about the 6 month to a year mark, there should be some notable improvements. There are some cases I can give people something very quickly. It'll sort of jumpstart the process, give them a few wins, see that things can go better. That's great. Other cases are much more difficult because if the abuse underlying the emotional suppression started young enough, like I'm talking 3-4 years old at some cases, the process is not deliberate. It's just a survival mechanism that inner 3-year-old is just so terrified of the phantom parents, the force ghosts reactions. They go numb, they dissociate, they don't feel. That's what I was talking about at the beginning. That is a very, very slow process of getting any emotion out of someone at all. And unfortunately, the first ones that come are the negative ones. If I can get a chuckle out of people every so often in those circumstances, it's like, all right, at least I said something amusing enough for them to grin. But that's real. And I think that hopefully hearing about this stuff will make people understand that their feelings, especially the feelings that you may associate with weakness, they're not, they're feedback. Weakness is what my biological father did, turning into the monster instead of, getting rid of the brainworms. And it is possible to get rid of the brainworms, but that process of accountability is tough. It is hard. And you need um someone to build you back up again when those mind palaces, those constructs fall apart, and tell you, someone who's been through it, to tell you this is a feature, not a bug. It sucked when I went through it, but I got through it. That's what a therapist can't do. That's what you need a community to do, right? That's what we're trying to build. That's what's kind of coming. But in the meantime, be aware that when you're pushing feelings away, you are pushing people away. You're pushing the people who care about your feelings away. And you're creating an invitation for people looking to use you, because I can't prove this. This is my own kind of woo-woo shit. But there are certain types of people. Maybe it's not that they can smell fear, they assume it's there. But they will pander to the deflections, to the projections. It's not you, it's them. Right? It's radical feminism, or what, Song and I call black pill feminism. The whole red pill movement is all about that. It's not you, it's them. It's luring you in. It's not you, it's them. Instead of it being, some of it is them. It is. Some of it is them. But them is not a monolith. The individual people you dealt with were individuals. And it's much safer to say, if you're heterosexual, all women are like that. Instead of going, that woman, and this is just one example, right? That woman who I adored, I thought the world of at one point, she was like that. Not all women, she was. Because then you get into the blame of, how did I miss that? What didn't I see? Was it me? The self-blame starts. And instead of putting it of, people do change sometimes. People get really bitter. And the unfortunate thing about those sweet girls, the shadow heart thing, is that a lot of that niceness is a lie. It's what women are supposed to be. It's a manipulation tactics. They say it's okay when it's not okay. The support isn't real and it lacks boundaries. They're trying real hard for it to be real, but it's a high wire act. It's not, they're not actually telling you the truth. And eventually, one day, instead of saying, this isn't working for me, it's like a switch flips, and they either find somebody else and cheat, or they find some other way to just get distance and then break it off. And then the guy's left. And I know this is very heteronormative. This is not just something women do, but it's something women are trained to do. And the guy's left sometimes for decades, wondering what the hell happened and not being able to get closure because they don't understand the training that leads to that. And then, they start questioning their own needs of, well, I want someone to understand. I want someone to care. You're saying that's a lie. How can I ever trust anybody again? And there are ways. But we have to disabuse ourselves of these perfected, idealized relationships. Conflict is part of relationships. Hi, Scout. Bitey. Talking past each other is sometimes part of relationships. A lot of the time, those early relationships we have happen when we are both either physical or mental adolescents. Because part of what teaches us to grow up is that heartbreak, the loss. Some people grow in a healthy way. Some people get all twisted. It's possible to untwist. A big part of it is environment. But this is the kind of stuff that I want to work through while you're waiting. Um, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes in relationships. But someone breaking their word is never your fault. Someone changing their mind can always happen. And it feels terrible when you're abandoned or betrayed. It is possible to process those emotions, but you need to feel them. And I really believe with that, therapy is not enough. You do need active comfort. Somebody you believe truly understands going, it's okay. Who is also willing to tell you when you fucked up. That's a thing I cherish about a lot of friendships, like relationships I have now, that we sort of have that of, I don't really like this, but this was really good. And you can't have somebody believe one without the other. And a lot of women are trained to not say, I don't like this, especially early on. Cuz it's all trying to be a whole bunch of things. For a lot of people, dating is all about being something you're not long enough for someone to be interested enough to get to know who you really are. But then you're starting from a deficit, right? Whereas if you're just authentic, even the stuff is, the list of words that are flag words for me, annoying or bitchy or, weak. The strongest people I've learned from could be vulnerable. And every time I watch something or read something or listen to something someone made, I appreciate the vulnerability of them sharing. I think that's really powerful. I think it's a good first step because they're risking negativity. They're risking insults. They're risking people judging negatively. And it's hard. And so I respect the hell out of anybody who does it. And I don't respect people who just sit there and take pot shots at shit and don't make anything themselves. So if you're struggling with this, if you're struggling with feeling your feelings and pushing the feelings away, and therefore, you're lonely, you don't have people around you because those people have been pushed away, try that. Try sharing things you think are good. Put that out. And you may get nothing at first, but that's okay. That's better than negative. Some ways it's not. I think it's better than negative. But eventually, you will meet someone and go, hey, I like that too. And then you'll get to talking about that. And then that was somebody who, it's a tiny connection, but it's a legitimate one. And really watch those feeling words. I feel is not I think. I feel must be followed by a feeling word. And this is something that drives people crazy, but it is a very good habit to get into because there is space for I think. But you can only have I think be pure reason if you can separate the I feel part from the I think part, and then understand the interweaving between thoughts and feelings to get a solid moral ethical framework. and then find people who share your core values that will have your back. And I've done this with cats crawling all over me this whole time. That is a core value of mine. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it, but can't afford it and wants to work through some of this stuff. Coffee.com/LeannaK, or the men's groups starting up in the next few weeks. We're going to hold the first one in the next few weeks, or at least open up the intake process for them. GoFundMe, link in the description box below. Thanks for watching Manly Mondays on Yom Kippur. Everybody who's fasting, hope you had a safe and healthy fast.